Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. I am Subodh Parulekar, co-founder and CEO of A4 Technologies. Welcome to A4's Cloud Security webinar. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to cover some housekeeping topics. This webinar will start with a keynote talk, followed by the main presentation and the Q&A session at the end. Please post your questions in the Q&A chat box on your screen or raise your hands and the questions will be taken up by the presenter in the Q&A portion at the end of the event. Today we have a great keynote speaker for you. He is the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Induspace, a company that has built a truly integrated web application security and compliance solution. It is an honor for me to introduce Venkatesh Sundar. Venkatesh, welcome. I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Subodh. It's my pleasure to be part of this exciting topic on cloud security. You guys have been doing some great things in this area as well. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to give some point of view and be part of this keynote address. Cloud security, I think it's certainly a hot topic right now. But before getting into cloud security, you have to understand that cloud adoption is happening at a phenomenal speed right now. The 2020 number from Gartner is it's a $250 billion market, growing at 17% year on year, which means in 4 years' time, it's going to be a $500 billion. And if the same growth rate happens, it's going to be a $1 trillion market in 10 years. And the primary reason for cloud adoption is not cost, it's not auto-scaling or pay-as-you-go, even though those are a convenience factor. The primary reason for cloud adoption for most of the business is the speed and agility it provides for them to do things quickly, right? And with speed and agility, and the cliche is, it's not about how big you are anymore that matters for your survival. It's about how fast you are and how fast you innovate on your core expertise that is going to be important for the survival of any business. Because of the agility and speed the speed of innovation to stay relevant, security risk becomes even more higher and becomes an oversight, and the likelihood of it becoming an oversight is higher. And with cloud adoption, cloud security has to be a key focus. And when you think about cloud security, it is important to understand the concept of shared responsibility that any cloud provider talks about, right? So shared responsibility in a nutshell is the infrastructure that the cloud provider provides is that the responsibility is their responsibility. So the infrastructure security is also their responsibility. But everything else, the payloads, the services, and whatever is running on that infrastructure is the customer's responsibility. So an S3 bucket, the security of the S3 bucket is the availability and security of the S3 bucket is the responsibility of AWS. But the access control and the authentication and the policies and whatever you put on the S3 bucket is the responsibility of the customer in an AWS environment. So in a nutshell, all the security of the services and the workloads and applications that are running on the cloud becomes the responsibility of the customer. So it is important to understand this shared responsibility model, and hence the customer has to realize that cloud adoption gives you a lot of convenience, but everything that you put on the cloud is the customer's responsibility, including security. And hence it has to be looked at in a proper manner and given a lot of priorities. And one of the best statement I can give, security should not come in the way of speed. Going fast is important, but the analogy I will give is, if you have a very good car that goes fast, you do not question the braking system, right? You also need to have a good braking system to enable you to go fast, right? So security is that braking system where you have to make sure you have a good braking system, incident management, those kind of things in place, and the responsibility is for the customer to take care of those things. Now, one might ask, what are some of the key trends around cloud security? One thing I can point out is whenever there is an increase in adoption for cloud or any kind of digitization adoption, there is a corresponding proportional increase in the security risks tied with that. In the context of India, where I'm based in, recently there was a Digital India push. This is the pre-COVID. I'm talking about 2016, 2017. There was a big Digital India movement by the government of India. CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team, India, they have an annual report, a public annual report they produce every year. The number of security incidents because of the digitization push year on year quadrupled. Fast forward to right now in 2020, the post-COVID situation has given a rocket fuel to digitizations for all companies. It's forced the companies to look at digitization. Whether it is a restaurant that was never even thinking about an online business, suddenly now have to embrace digitization and initiatives on online food, and they don't have a choice. It's for survival. So all kinds of apps and everything is going to digital, and cloud is the fastest way to enable those digitization. CERT does not produce a report in the middle of the year, but it will be very interesting to see what the numbers are going to look like by the end of this year. So certainly digitization is here to stay, and it is happening faster. And security is going to become even more important. Cloud security specifically is going to become even more important. What I'm going to talk about is we take application security as a pain point that customers have away from the customer and solve that problem. A4 solves the broader problem of cloud security as a whole. We solve the application security problem. So Aptrana is a SaaS-based cloud security product built on the cloud for the cloud. Our entire SaaS offering is on the public cloud. In a nutshell, what we do for application security is the first step of security is visibility. So we provide risk detection services through a combination of automated scan and manual penetration testing, which will give you a visibility of your risk. No visibility, no security. So risk detection gives you continuous visibility, on-demand visibility, both through an automated scanner and through a manual pen testing on demand. Once the visibility is there, you'll have to take steps to protect against those risks. Right? So even though the right way to fix it is in the application, it may not always be possible because no application is an island. It's an integrated world right now. It is going to use consume APIs from third-party services running on a third-party operating system, on a third-party web server. So even though there is an intent to fix it and the right place to fix it is in the application itself, it may not always be possible to do it in a timely manner. So the risk protection service instantly protects you against the detected risk. That is what we do as part of the Aptrana service. We provide risk detection and instant risk protection through our web application firewall as a managed offering. Now, and it's not, the application is a continuously evolving thing with all this agility and changes that is happening. You cannot just say that I have a configuration target that's going to work. You have to keep up with the changing environment, changing threat vector, the changing application itself. So risk monitoring to keep up with those changes as a managed service is a very important thing, so that on a continuous basis, based on an ongoing risk and your the criticality of those risks, a risk-based managed service ensures that the protection is always there, accurate, relevant, based on your application risk. And then we finally believe that on the cloud, when people are going to take this service, they should not have to make that trade-off between speed and security. So it was imperative for us, even though it's not our core focus, to bundle in a web acceleration service. So we, by default, bundle in a CDN, or we can work with customers' existing CDN, integrate with that, so that their site acceleration is also provided, and we provide the best in breed application security. So in this phase is managed cloud WAF, which includes automated scanning, manual pen testing, managed services on the web application firewall as on an ongoing basis. So with that, I think I'm going to stop. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk a little about doing this keynote. I'm going to pass it on to A4 to talk on the broader topic of cloud security.
Thank you, Venkatesh, for your valuable insights on cloud security. Thank you all for joining this webinar. I'm Swapnil Naik, and I have been working in security domain for almost 20 years, and I'm leading the security team at A4 Technologies. In the next 40 minutes of the webinar, I will be sharing some useful insights on AWS cloud security issues and tips on secure deployments and tools based on all our experience working on cloud security over the years. I have reserved the last 10 minutes for questions. So I would request you to share your queries only over chat, and I'll try to address most of the queries. However, if time does not permit, I will email responses to your queries. Post the meeting, the presentation would be emailed to all attendees. So let's get started. Okay, so S3 ransomware attack is quite interesting. It is scary to imagine that your sensitive information like IP, financial data, PII, PHI can be held to ransom in cloud. Should you be attacked by ransomware, there could be huge financial implications and lawsuits that may follow if this data is leaked. So this is an AWS cross-account hack and can happen in our cloud deployments if an IAM account with high permissions is compromised. So let's try to understand how data in S3 can be held to ransom. So let us consider two accounts, AWS accounts. There is one account which is attacker account and the other which is the victim account. So the adversary or the malicious user Tiger from the attacker account is going to launch the attack, and he is going to basically leverage, the account, the credentials of Scott. So let us assume that Scott's account is compromised and Tiger has his access keys. Now Tiger can create KMS symmetric key K1 in his own account, that is in the attacker's account, and create a key policy adding user Scott from victim account to use his key for encryption, decryption. So next is the Tiger using Scott's account creates IAM policy in victim's account because he has access to victim's account, because the assumption here is the victim's account is compromised. He has the access keys. And assigns policy to Scott to use attacker's key Key1 for encryption and decryption. So basically what's needed is the required permissions. So now Tiger connects to S3 bucket and creates a copy of the files in S3 using K1 and encrypts the same and deletes the original files. Next, Tiger updates key policy in his attacker account, revoking Scott's access to this key. So, which means that the victim's account basically is not in a position to basically get the files back because they don't have access to the key. So Scott, though, can access to S3 bucket, does not have access to Key1, and hence he cannot decrypt the files. So now the attacker, that's the Tiger, he can leave a ransom note on payment details along with a deadline. Essentially, the permissions needed here are basically encrypt, decrypt, and access to the principals over here, which is in this case, Scott and Tiger. So basically what we have learned is how in a cross-account scenario, an attacker can use his own key and launch an attack on the victim's account, encrypting their files and then revoking the permissions of that key, okay, and hold data to ransom. Now, it's key to understand over here in such a case, the data could be held to ransom because number one is there was no versioning set to the S3 bucket, right, which has the data. So there's no versioning, there are no multiple copies, there's no backups, right? And the second basically was there was no MFA enabled for, say, in this case, the user Scott to delete S3 objects. Because had that been the case, then the attacker would not be able to delete because of the MFA issue. So basically the remediation that I just want to quickly call out here is make sure that few admins have policy creation, updation, they have MFA enabled so that there's a second factor for authentication. There's minimum privileges enforced for most of the users. MFA is specially enabled for delete of S3 data. The versioning is set for S3 objects. And in case the data is more like historical data, but important data, let's say financial data of the past for historical reasons or for audit reasons, then in that case, it's like more like write only and read many. So S3 gives you an option to have a warm folder, WRM, which is write once, read many. And so in this case, the attacker would not have been able to delete. So this is basically about S3 ransomware, on how an attack is launched and how you can remediate. Let's go to the next one, which is on EC2 instances roles. So some of you may have heard in the year 2019, Capital One Bank was hacked. It had their solution in AWS deployed, was hacked. And the attacker had access to around 700 S3 buckets. And the case was being investigated by FBI. The exact details of the hack are not known, but based on the traces left behind, it is quite certain that the attacks were a combination of the cloud firewall, wherein there's a suspicion that there was a SSH port left open, and misconfigured IAM policies attached to a role which was associated to an EC2 instance. So as we all know, AWS supports EC2 instances to leverage roles, which basically is temporary credentials, with permissions to access AWS resources. So just like how a user has access to AWS resources after creating an account, we can also launch an instance, EC2 instance, wherein the instance and all services that are hosted on it can start accessing AWS resources based on the role assigned. So this is the feature that can be exploited if a user has a compromised instance and the IAM policies associated with the EC2 instance are misconfigured. So for this hack, let's assume the AWS EC2 instance is compromised and the user has share access. Okay. So the compromised instance has a role attached with a misconfigured policy permissions. Like for example, there could be a role with policy attached that has permissions to pass a role. Okay. And also to replace instance profile association to a different role. So next is the attacker who has basically access to this instance can run a CLI command to basically just do a recon of the AWS resources, and he can figure out through this AWS CLI commands, for example, and start listing out roles, attached policies, and if he's lucky, he identifies a role that basically has access to S3 buckets. So commands are like list roles, attached attached role policies, so you know what policies are attached to the role. So this way he can do a recon and get more information. Now the attacker, the next step is that he replaces the role of the instance profile that may have access to S3. So there could be a role which possibly that was attached that may not have access to S3. But then since there are this policy attached to the role, existing role was misconfigured and had higher permissions, you could basically change the association by replacing the role of the attached instance profile. So he can attach this new role to the same instance. And now the attacker has the required permissions to read and write to S3 and basically exfiltrate data. Okay? So this is how you can exploit an EC2 instance, replace roles to the instance and get access to sensitive information. So on similar lines like the previous case, the remediation would be is carefully review the role permissions and make sure MFA is enabled for users who basically have higher privileges. While this is a feature, it's a good practice to avoid running EC2 instance with roles. Then use tools like, for example, AWS Inspector to regularly audit the compliance. Because as I said, in order to basically connect to the EC2 instance, there could have been some code open by which it got connected. And so basically, you need to have certain tools to audit your EC2 instances and identify if there are some ports open, and maybe through automation automatically revoke or basically close those ports. And we need to be a little careful on permissions like pass roles, replace profiles, to make sure that only the right people, authorized users have access to it. So this is how EC2 roles can be exploited attached to EC2 instances. So we covered two security issues. Now, the next topic is hard coding database credentials in code, which is also a vulnerability because, as you know, there are a lot of GitHub repositories, which are public, which accidentally or maybe by negligence have credentials checked into code. So, in the year of 2019, October, there was an interesting incident where the stolen credit card database from dark web itself was hacked, containing 26 million credit card and debit card details, and then this was shared online. So DB credentials can be leaked through source code, CI/CD pipelines, and AWS offers you features that do not need a DB password to be hard-coded into the application. So in this example, I have a design to suggest to eliminate this kind of a vulnerability that leverages RDS proxy. I'm not too sure how many of you are aware, but this is a new feature that was recently launched I think a month or two ago. And RDS proxy, along with AWS Secrets Manager, allows not just secure connection to DB without having credentials in code, but also helps in scaling and resiliency of database connections. So IAM authentication with Secrets Manager helps in eliminating the need of credentials application code. So that's what Secret Manager can help you with. While RDS proxy helps in maintaining a pool of connections instead of stressing the resources creating connection each time, and also helps in maintaining resiliency by automatic failovers to DB instances across other availability zones in case of a failover. So this is a great feature, especially for serverless applications, serverless architecture, as solutions may have hundreds and thousands of lambdas that basically access databases and creating many connections. So that's where RDS proxy can help you by maintaining a cache of DB connection pools and reusing that. So in short, if you want to go about leveraging this feature, that's RDS proxy and Secret Manager, the steps would be is number one is to configure the Secrets Manager, wherein you create the credential for the database and you can use default encryption key optionally to encrypt the secret. You can also specify rotation of the password, the secret. So once you have done creating a credential in Secrets Manager, next step would be is to create an RDS proxy, wherein you specify the database. If you want the application to talk to the RDS proxy and you want to encrypt the communications, then you can specify TLS connection. And you can enable IAM authentication that the app will use and access the Secrets Manager via the RDS proxy and retrieve the database credentials and then can connect to the database. So the step 3 eventually to leverage this tool is, for example, if you have Lambda, then you can basically specify the RDS proxy endpoint that you just created in the earlier step. And then you can specify an execution role so that basically the application, the Lambda application has access to RDS proxy. So overall, Lambda would need access rights to the RDS proxy, and RDS proxy would need rights to connect to Secrets Manager. So this is how basically you can leverage IAM authentication Secrets Manager. And in order to have a neat and a clean scalable design, you can leverage RDS proxy. So this is the third topic that I just wanted to talk about on how you can go about designing your access to databases. So we discussed multiple issues now: S3 ransomware, exfiltration through data exfiltration through EC2 roles. We discussed how we can avoid using database credentials being hard-coded in application code. Now let's take another topic, which basically is to evade how attackers can use certain techniques to evade the defense. So we know that adversaries leverage access keys of compromised IAM accounts with misconfigured permissions for data exfiltration. So in this example, let us learn how attackers can evade defenders and silently stay in the system and exfiltrate data. So let us assume the attacker has access keys to connect to AWS. And as his account has high permissions, he can assume roles that has access to S3 because it's misconfigured with high permissions. So the attacker now assumes an existing role by which he gets temporary credentials, a token, let's say token A. And using this as assuming, and he leverages this assume role and starts accessing basically the S3 data, because the role that he assumes has access permissions to S3. So now he basically starts exfiltrating data, but maybe the deployment has good defense techniques deployed, maybe through automation or through some tools. So the defender may immediately receive an alarm from CloudWatch, for example, that an account is doing some suspicious activity and is trying to access sensitive data in S3. So what the defender would do is he would try to block the attacker. So he may do the following, right? Number one is, since there's a suspicious user, there are chances that the access keys were leaked and the attacker used those access keys. So the defender may delete the access keys, or he may deactivate the access keys so that this user is not able to is not able to authenticate and connect to AWS again. However, since he's already connected, right, he already has a token by which he is accessing the resources. So token A issued in this example to the user, though cannot be revoked till it expires, can be denied access to all AWS resources, because whenever there's an API call, there's always a permission check. So by applying new policy to role to deny access, but what it does is basically he denies permissions to all the existing tokens issued to this role. So with these changes, the defender assumes that the vulnerability is eradicated because the issued token has been denied access, And also the compromised access keys are no longer valid to access AWS resources. So to evade this defense, the attacker upfront has very smartly created an additional token B using an API get session token, which has access based on the IAM policies attached to the user. So basically, in the first case, he basically was accessing S3 data through Assume role. But since he was caught, he has very smartly, the moment he has, say, connected to AWS, he has upfront created token B. Okay, so this way now he can use the token B, which is not having the credentials of the role, but actually the token B has permissions based on the IAM policies attached to the user, the compromised the account that is using. So now using this token B, he can again go maybe after a few hours, whatever, and he can again basically assume the same role to access the S3 bucket. So it all depends on how smartly you have applied your eradication techniques, because if you have applied things like what I've just mentioned now, then the attacker basically has evaded your defense technique. Now, Assume role basically creates tokens that can last for up to 12 hours, but the get session token can go up to 36 hours. So now coming to the remediation, what's important is provide minimum permissions. So the user, only the right users can assume roles. They're not misconfigured. You can also use MFA along with assume role using the conditions field, the IAM policy. And in this case, as we know that the policy that was applied was only for issued tokens of the role, it's always good to have a denial policy for the role and not have any filter based on type. So I hope you have got an idea about how attackers can still start staying silently in the system, okay, and can use evading techniques like what I just mentioned. So moving over to the next topic is the common patterns. So over the years, when we have conducted multiple AWS cloud security audits, we have seen a number of issues, and I just wanted to highlight some of the basic patterns that we have seen across multiple accounts that we have worked with in the past. So let's say IAM, generally it's misconfigured IAM accounts and policies, no MFA attached for high privilege accounts. So example is due to many permissions in AWS, it gets tedious to understand what permissions are needed. And so many users end up having higher privileges. MFA also is not set for administrators. On firewall, we have misconfigured ingress and egress traffic in security groups, NACLs, SSH port open for everyone over internet due to a maintenance window or some development efforts going on, and they left it behind. And also because it's observed that even the internal instances have SSH open, and every other instance can connect to the other through SSH, which is not a good practice. Many applications that have very sensitive information, like health or financial applications, they do not have WAF, the application firewall, installed to protect the applications from attacks, DOS or cross-site scripting, things like that. So it's recommended to have the application firewall, and as Venkatesh just said, they have a very great application that helps you protect their applications, the AppTrana, the application firewall. Monitoring, there's lack of good insights in monitoring applications, host and infrastructure. It's not adequate enough that gives you enough insight or enough visibility on what's happening in your AWS deployment. Like for example, if an attacker makes an S3 bucket public, or you have left it accidentally, then at times the security team does not have the right notifications. Right? Then at times buckets having sensitive information, the encryption is missing. On AWS host security, basically patches are not up to date. Sometimes the software is end of life, backups are not encrypted, and the audit logs are not collected from the hosts. The others that you see is exposed credentials, like temporary credentials in API response in browser. So at times what happens is basically your application, your web application, has to talk to some AWS services for which it needs tokens, security tokens to authenticate. So this authentication sometimes is not delegated to the backend, and the credentials will be sent to the client, and then the client uses this token and makes another API call to a managed service of AWS. So if someone is basically sniffing on your API calls, and you can start seeing these tokens and then use tools like Postman, something, and start making API calls using those tokens. Then access keys and registry database credentials hard coded. So then missing right DR strategy, high availability sometimes is not configured for all components, and if configured, it's not tested and perhaps not working for high availability. And also, most importantly, is the deployment architecture of application services, AWS, resources use, the network ACLs, security groups, the component communications are not documented well. It makes it quite tedious to go and deploy newer services, right? And that may leave certain holes because you do not have a very well documented architecture. These are some of the common patterns that we have seen of issues while we are working on auditing multiple clouds. Okay, so all this while we have discussed security issues, we have discussed how attackers can evade techniques, we have discussed common patterns. So this topic, question is, what do I do when an incident happens? What does the security team do? What does the SOC team do? Is there a good framework that I can adhere to systematically respond to incidents? So National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has a good security framework, good cybersecurity framework to respond to incidents. So I would just like to give you an idea about what's a very methodical and structured way of defining an incident response policy. So in the first phase, basically the preparation phase this is the phase which happens before the incident has happened, the security incident. And the objective is to have a right incident response process. It would also help if you have a good security simulation programs, so that you can launch some attacks in your test account and see how does the SOC team or how does the security team basically respond and handle or defend such attacks. So this is just the preparation phase. So the next phase is detection. So from this phase onwards, it basically is after the incident has happened, how do you go about it, right? So detection is the phase where the incident is discovered. The objective is really to identify attacker intention. Now, what's the blast radius, the impact, the possible impact, and maybe what to isolate. So let's say there's a connection from IP X observed from country Y to an S3 bucket that holds financial data, okay, which was not expected. So this is an example of an incident that was just discovered. So the next phase is the containment phase. Phase 2, which is to isolate the compromised resources. So the objective here is to basically establish, apply temporary fixes while the investigation and eradication of this security incident may take longer time. So what you may want to do is just quickly, based on what you have detected, is maybe apply a deny all policy to an IAM account, maybe update firewalls to block the IP in the example that I gave. So that's how you can quickly contain the incident. The next phase is the investigation phase, which is the phase 3, wherein you identify the cause and the impact. This is a very important phase. The objective is basically to establish a timeline for the event and conduct forensic analysis. So you can investigate logs within that time window. You can check what resources were accessed, if was there any data loss within that specific time window. So the next phase, the phase 4, which is the eradication phase, is to remove the vulnerability completely. The objective is based on the data collected during the investigation phase, you can eradicate the issue and by fixing all the vulnerabilities or the security misconfigurations. So for example, rotate the access keys, fix the ACL, bucket policies, stop spillage, fix the security groups, NACL. So you do all of this. And followed by the next phase, which is the recovery phase, the phase 5. So what you have done is you have done all the necessary configurations, but you may still have the policy deny all for that user that's compromised. Right? So now you want to recover because now you know you have basically done the required configurations to eradicate the issue. So you remove all the quick fixes that were done, recover from the loss, and like example is apply the right policy to the IAM user, restore data into S3 if any data was deleted, encrypt the data, so on and so forth. So now you have recovered. So now that you have eradicated, the last phase is also important, which is the post-event activity, the phase 6, which is more like a post-mortem of the incident, where one of the key action items is basically to report the incident to the AWS abuse team. Because if this is missed multiple times, AWS has the right, as per the policy that you have signed, to terminate your account. So you need to report to AWS. If they reported the abuse to you, to fix the process scraps. It's always a good idea to automate the remediation, because manually, trying to investigate, manually trying to apply the fixes may take time. And basically continue to monitor the same account resources, so you are certain that you have eradicated the complete incident and there is no further chances that a similar issue can happen. So that's on incident response. Coming to the next topic, which is we have issues, we have patterns, we have some idea on how to respond to incidents. But now we may need some help on how do we go about creating a secure deployment. So to defend against these attacks, how do we ensure all security considerations are factored in while architecting and implementing secure AWS deployments? So while architecting new AWS deployments or continuously improving existing deployments, it is recommended to use AWS well-architected tool that helps to design better architectures, not just for security, but reliability, operational excellence, cost, and performance as well. It's basically the 5 pillars of a well-architected AWS framework or AWS deployment. So this tool, basically the AWS well-architected tool is basically a questionnaire. If you log into your console and you just say AWS well-architected tool, it launches a tool. It basically is a questionnaire that helps you evaluate your architectures against AWS best practices. So in security, the tool provides multiple recommendations. What you see on the screen that's listed is how do you manage identities, people, machines, how do you manage permissions, how do you defend and investigate security events, protect network resources, compute resources, how do you classify data, how do you protect data at rest, transit, and how do you recover from incidents. So these are the broad categories, and within that there are multiple practices that they have to suggest, and the architect or the one who's deploying or architecting the solution can basically go through all these questionnaires and tick mark the practices that he has already factored in, and he can create milestones to track the progress periodically. Also, AWS has well-architected labs. There's a site called as wellarchitectedlabs.com that can be leveraged for a hands-on lab exercises so that you understand the nitty-gritties on the configurations and practices that you need to implement while building a secure deployment in AWS. So it's quite a useful tool that you may want to check out. The next topic is tools. So there are a wide range of tools that are good when it comes to reporting and defending attacks in cloud. My recommendation here is to consider tools that you can scan your cloud environment, you can analyze the issues, you can take action on data before it leaves the enterprise network. Because as I just said, manual intervention of security incidents may take longer, during which the adversary may have significantly impacted your business by disrupting services, stealing information, leaking sensitive information, right? So let's go through some of the tools. Say for cloud platforms, basically what I wanted to call out is we have worked on AWS and Azure, but Monty Cloud is an interesting cloud management platform that we have used at A4, and I like the simplicity of the Monty Cloud platform that helps ease of use to manage and secure your cloud solutions. So it's definitely a good platform to worth taking a look at. On infrastructure protection, you've heard quite a bit from Venkatesh, but AppTrana for DDoS, for web application attacks is great. And especially, I like the security support service that AppTrana provides to protect their applications. For host protection, you can use a Monty Cloud platform for managing your patches. You can use antivirus like CrowdStrike. You can use AWS Inspector for vulnerabilities, anomaly detection, security configurations on your hosts. Also, you can deploy CloudWatch agents so that you can collect logs and monitor the activities on instances. On cloud audits, AWS Config is quite good. It supports auditing and compliance. It has good analysis on security misconfigurations on your AWS resources. It can send notifications based on the changes that have been done on your AWS deployment. Cloud Security Suite is an open source tool that gives you good insights into security misconfigurations on cloud. It supports Azure, it supports AWS. And Qualys also is a great tool that can be used for cloud audits, cloud scans audits. On pen testing, you can use Haku. Is a tool that you can use to have some pen tests executed. On security monitoring, right, your entire deployment, CloudWatch is good. You can use AWS EventBridge. There are other tools like Datadog, Splunk, where you can consolidate all your logs and have your rules engine on top of it to get metrics, alarms based on metrics or based on certain patterns that you see in logs. Also, AWS GuardDuty is a good monitoring services that analyzes and processes data sources like VPC flow logs, CloudTrail logs. So it's basically used to provide you threat intelligence and detect any anomalies on your AWS deployments. So, so that's in short about tools, beyond that, you can use certain standards, best practices like CIS, AWS benchmarks to have the right configurations in your AWS services, on your AWS hosts, right? So that's also a good standard to use to harden your AWS environment. So that's a broad overview on the tools. Next is on this. I've kind of done with most of the topics that I had. I just also wanted to take this opportunity to give you an idea about the services we offer. We have been providing web, mobile, cloud security pen testing services for more than 3 years now for various verticals like next generation data centers, fintech domains, healthcare, logistics, manufacturing. Overall, we are a team of 8 and are active contributors to bug bounty programs, and some of us are also listed in the Hall of Fame. So this brings me to the end of my talk, and I hope you have found this session useful, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Okay, so I have one question here is with regards to permission boundaries. So what I would say basically is when a policy is assigned to an user, whatever permission is set in the policy is basically is what the user has access to resources. So permission boundaries is a feature that has been provided by AWS to basically ensure that he's not able to access anything beyond what is assigned to. So that's definitely, I would say, a good hygiene. But what I would say is while you have quite a number of policies and permission boundaries, it can be really difficult to get the overall picture. So I would also recommend using tools like PMapper, which is to check entitlements of permissions on users and groups and roles. And that will give you a good idea if you have too many permissions assigned to do security misconfigurations, which you would like to fix. So the next question that I have is, what is the overall audit turnaround time that we take to perform a security audit? So I would say that depends on the number of accounts that we need to audit. Like we basically most of the times do a security audit on staging environments, production environments, and there could be more accounts as well. But in general, the time taken based on complexity could be anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks to perform a security audit. I hope that answers the question on the time taken. Yeah, I think. Yeah. So there's another question on what is a tool basically to get user permissions, right? So great question. I think one of the biggest problems in any cloud environment is you have too many permissions assigned, because primarily the complexity in the permissions to understand them, and since you want to get certain functionality up and running fast, so maybe in the haste you have too many permissions assigned. So as I just said, I think you should try PMapper. That's a good tool that will give you enough insights on the permissions assigned to a user, a group, a role. Like for example, let's say a user Scott, he basically does not have access to S3. Okay, so but he may have permissions on an EC2 instance that he can launch and use. Now, there could be a role associated with that instance by which he can access S3. So PMapper is a good tool which can help you identify such loopholes that basically an adversary can exploit. Yeah. So I think these were the 5-6 questions that were asked that I think I have responded. And we still have around a couple of minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. So if there are no further questions, what tools you recommend for guest OS application patching and managed file? Okay, so there is another question on how do you basically what tools do we use to manage patches. So as I said, there's AWS Systems Manager, which can be used to apply patches, and they have quite a number of features wherein you can apply only critical patches or things like that. And the other tool that I would recommend, especially if you want to get rid of the complexity of AWS and the tons of services around it, you can also have platforms like Monty Cloud, which also is great. It helps you manage patches on your Windows and your Linux systems. So these are some of the tools that I would recommend for patch management of your EC2 instances. Okay, I think that was the last question. I thank you all for taking out the time to attend this seminar and post this meeting. In a couple of days, you will receive the presentation back. And the DAC also basically has my email ID, and please feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to help. Subodh, I'm done. Do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, Venkatesh. Thank you, Swapnil. That was a great presentation. And thanks to all those who attended this webinar. We will have more such webinars going forward. And if you have any other questions, please send those to us via email. We'll be happy to respond to your questions. Swapnil himself will respond to those questions and take those over the next few days. So thanks a lot. I know some of you have been, you stayed up late in India to attend this webinar, and thanks, special thanks to those people and to everyone here in the US as well who have been attending this from various time zones. Have a good day, good night, and good evening, everyone.